In civil law, the tort of negligence is defined as a breach of a legal duty that results in undesired harm to a claimant. We all make careless mistakes, but everyday carelessness is legally irrelevant unless it satisfies a strict mathematical equation. Liability hinges entirely on three sequential logic gates: duty of care, breach of duty, and causation. These gates operate in an absolute sequence. If a claimant fails to meet the legal threshold at any single checkpoint, the entire claim immediately collapses. To succeed in an exam or clinical setting, you must systematically map the specific doctrinal rules required to clear each gate. This rigid architecture provides a predictable, testable mechanism for determining fault, preventing the courts from imposing infinite liability on the public. We enter the first gate, duty of care. Before evaluating what a defendant actually did, we have to prove they had a recognized legal obligation to the claimant. The most efficient route through this gate is relying on established duties. Case law already recognizes standard obligations, such as a doctor's duty to a patient or a driver's duty to a pedestrian. When courts ruled a manufacturer owed a duty to a consumer, it established a legal precedent that remains the core of product liability today. The procedural advantage in these cases is massive. If your scenario involves an established category, the claimant immediately satisfies the first gate and proceeds directly to Gate 2. Established duties allow the court to bypass philosophical debates about obligation and immediately evaluate the facts of the defendant's conduct. You will frequently encounter novel duties, situations where the factual matrix is unprecedented and no established duty exists. To establish a novel duty under the Caparo test, you must first prove reasonable foreseeability of harm and close proximity between the parties. However, the third crucial prong requires the court to find it fair, just, and reasonable to impose that duty. This third prong acts as a policy shield. For instance, courts routinely rule it is not fair or reasonable to impose a duty of care on the police for failing to catch a specific criminal, because doing so would overwhelm public resources with litigation. This strict boundary is most visible regarding omissions. Historically, there is zero legal duty to act or step in to rescue a stranger. There are strict exceptions. If a defendant worsens the situation or holds a relationship of control. The threshold for a novel duty is kept deliberately high to protect public sector resources and prevent the law from policing passive bystander behavior. Once a duty is established, we arrive at Gate 2, breach of duty. The court tests conduct against a strict legal metric. This matrix shows the reasonable person baseline. If a defendant's experience drops to 0, the standard of care remains fixed. This impersonal rule means a learner driver is judged as a veteran, and a junior doctor must hit the line of a fully competent professional. The inverse is also true for skilled professionals. If someone claims a special skill, they are judged against a responsible body of peers possessing that exact same skill. Gate 2 ignores good intentions and personal limitations. It prioritizes the victim's right to a consistent, predictable level of baseline safety. Courts use a balancing scale to determine if behavior is reasonable. First, they evaluate the likelihood of an injury. Second, they examine the potential seriousness of the harm. Finally, they weigh these risks against the financial cost and practical difficulty of taking precautions. Astronomical costs do not excuse a defendant if the risk of severe injury is massive, but the law will not demand expensive, crippling precautions to prevent risks that are microscopic. In many cases, compliance with common industry practice serves as strong evidence that the precautions taken were reasonable. However, common practice offers no protection if the court decides the entire industry standard is flawed. A court ruled the maritime practice of leaving bow doors open on ferries was inherently negligent, regardless of how many ships operated that way. Crucially, conduct is judged based solely on the state of scientific and technical knowledge at the time the incident occurred, not by future discoveries. Establishing a breach requires proving the defendant failed a strict mathematical calculation of risk creation versus risk prevention. We finally reach the third gate, causation. Even if a defendant acted unreasonably, the claim fails if that breach didn't trigger the damage. Factual causation is measured by the strict but-for test. You must ask, but for the defendant's negligence, would the harm have happened anyway? This chart shows probability curves plotted against a 50% threshold line. Courts require claimants to prove causation on the balance of probabilities. Proving a 51% probability yields 100% compensation. Conversely, proving a 49% probability yields 0 compensation. Medical scenarios with multiple competing causes often fail at this exact gate. Isolating a specific breach and proving it crosses that 50% threshold over other health factors becomes mathematically impossible. Causation acts as the final, ruthless filter. It ensures defendants are strictly penalized for the damage they actually caused, rather than the damage they merely happened to be present for. We can now view the fully constructed architecture of the tort of negligence: duty, breach, and causation standing in strict sequence. Let's run a clean factual matrix through the model. A defendant carelessly leaves a bonfire unattended, which spreads and burns down a neighbor's structure. The first gate is satisfied. A clear, established duty of care exists between physical neighbors. The second gate is satisfied. Leaving a fire unattended fails the balancing scale, as the cost of watching it was 0 compared to the high risk of destruction. The third gate is satisfied. But for the unattended fire, the neighbor's structure would not have burned, comfortably clearing the probability threshold. The tort of negligence demands rigorous structural alignment. By running every exam scenario through this strict logic sequence, practitioners can instantly diagnose liability and accurately predict the outcome of any claim.